So, bit of an update. The original problem was thought to be the starter solenoid was not working. So ordered a replacement one, that's arrived, went to fit it, which necessitates removing the entire starter itself, and it turned out the original solenoid was actually fine. So that then led me to basically open up the starter itself to have a look and to find out what the problem was with the starter, why it wasn't engaging, and that's when I found that the inner planetary gear ring was completely stripped. That then asks the question, why is it completely stripped? And the simple answer to that is that the engine has seized up. The engine seized because it's full of water. So how did I find that out? Quite simply, taking out spark plugs on the left side, the port side bank, and as I took the first spark plug out, water just came pouring out of the hole itself. So that's the plug itself. As you can see, quite poor condition overall. So my concerns are as follows. It might be that it's simply a case of water has back flushed up through the exhaust. It shouldn't happen because these have got high rise risers on them, 7-inch risers. So basically it's a longer journey for the water to take if it's being pushed in from behind. It is possible, although where the boat is in the marina at the moment, it's bow in to any waves or any sort of prevailing traffic. So it'd have to be really quite horrendous backwash, as it were, coming from another vessel or from some really heavy storm conditions, which we have had over the last couple of months, for it to be in there. I think it's unlikely. I'm about to open up the starboard side port plugs as well and find out what the situation is there. If it's in both sides, that strongly indicates that it's something common, i.e. it's going to be through the main exhaust itself. Second thing, moving up in sort of escalation as it were, is that it could just simply be the gasket in between the riser and the main manifold itself. That has been replaced recently. It is possible that that could be leaking. I think it's unlikely, but it is a possibility. If that's the case, then seawater from the cooling system has basically been pumped in through that gasket and has gone straight into the exhaust chamber, and therefore it will just run back down into the exhaust when the engines are either idle or even not running at all. The next thing would be the possibility of the exhaust manifold itself having failed internally. It's a cast iron unit. It consists of an outer jacket which is filled full of seawater, cools the exhaust itself, and then that water is ejected out through the riser, mixed into the exhaust gas after the engine, and is basically pumped out over the back. It is possible that there has been heavy corrosion inside that riser, either inside the riser or inside the manifold itself, and the wall thickness between the exhaust bit and the water bit has basically failed and it's allowed water in. So, to summarise, the exhaust system consists of the inner chamber, which is surrounded by a water chamber or jacket. Exhaust gases from the 4 exhaust ports each side of the engine pump the exhaust gas out through the manifold, up the riser, and then out through the main exhaust pipes. The water in the cooling jacket is pumped in from the bottom, and after it circulates through the jacket itself, is ejected into the flow of the exhaust gases back at the back of the riser and mixes to form a vapour. The wall between the water jacket and the exhaust chamber can be fairly thin in places, and with corrosion due to salt water, the casting can fail. In between the manifold and the riser, there is a thin gasket. If this fails, it can allow water to be pumped into the exhaust chamber as well. When the boat is just sitting in the water, the natural water line outside is about level with the bottom of the exhaust manifold. Another possible reason for water ingress could be what's known as Charles' law of gases. When the engine is running, the exhaust gas is approximately 400 degrees centigrade. When the engine stops,
any gas left in the exhaust will start to cool. As it cools, it contracts or shrinks, and this can have the effect of sucking water up through the exhaust pipe. With this elevated level, it would only take a small amount of rocking or wave action outside of the boat to cause water to splash over the top of the riser and fill the exhaust chamber below.
So I've taken the 4 bolts out to hold the riser into place, just moved aside the ignition module and the power steering reservoir. So this is now ready to go. Undone the band clamps and removed the exhaust temperature sender unit as well. So this should now just lift straight off. A little bit of wiggling, there we go. You can see it just comes straight away, and as soon as we open it up, you can see there is water sat actually in the exhaust itself, in both sides, and what's stopping that from going into the cylinder is the fact that the valves are closed on that side. So at the moment the engine is in a sort of safe condition, but you can see here the gasket is in very, very poor condition, and that was only replaced a couple of months ago, and you can see it's all corroded through. If you just flip this over, you can see there's big chunks of gasket missing, as it were. So that's the problem, is gaskets fail.
It's obvious to me at this point that the exhaust manifolds are going to have to come off for inspection. Before doing so, I thought a simple way of checking how much water was in there was to use a wet and dry vac to try and suck it out. The vac was empty before I started. This was the amount of water that just came out of the 2 exhaust manifolds. With the manifold now removed, I was able to get my first look inside the exhaust ports to see just how bad the damage was. Initially I was quite pleased, and then as I moved on to other cylinders, the damage was getting progressively worse. See here there's a significant amount of salt and corrosion that's built up in the water chamber around the exhaust manifold. The same is true of the exhaust riser. To remedy this and to make it easier to inspect, both the exhaust risers and the exhaust manifolds were placed in a muriatic acid dip, basically brick cleaner, and left to soak for 24 hours. part 2, I'll be taking off the inlet manifold and the cylinder heads to find out just how bad things really are.